And we are live. We're live, guys. Welcome to another episode of Good Morning Liberty. My name is Michael Boldin. It is Wednesday, 10/10/2018, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So good morning to you if you're here on the West Coast like I am in Los Angeles, or good afternoon like Matt Hugh from the Democratic People's Republic of New Jersey. Hi in the chat to Matt and Scouse Jack and any others of you who are watching as we're broadcasting live. Please, if you do like what we're doing here at the 10th Amendment Center and these broadcasts every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, make sure to smash those likes. Likes need to be smashed. It helps us spread the word. Our numbers are growing. Our subscribers are consistently increasing at a much better pace than they were when we were basically neglecting this channel for years up until just a few months ago. And the minutes watched on other videos, older videos, are great because we're seeing that people, when they're watching this show, are starting to dig around and say, oh, well, what else do these guys have to say? So that's a very positive thing. So I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate everyone who's been smashing those likes, sharing the links to this on YouTube, or whether you're watching it on BitChute or on Reel.video. We post those later on after the video processes here on YouTube. We're very grateful for everyone. Hello to everyone, and thank you for being with us again. So today I want to talk about gun control. A few months back, well, 2 months ago, back in August, I think it was the 13th, the number. Hi to Will Johnson as well in the chat. So it was August 13th. It was one of my first episodes that I had done. I talked about how the Trump administration actually has ramped up enforcement of gun control, federal gun control laws already on the books, beyond the level where Barack Obama had done so. You'd think with the NRA-backed president, the Second Amendment guy, he repeatedly talked about how he's the Second Amendment president. He's going to be the Second Amendment guy. Second Amendment is going to be safe. The Trump would come in, and at the very, very least, things would not get worse. It should be a marked difference, a significant difference in the amount of enforcement. And I pointed out in that episode, and I'll link to it as well in the show notes, and of course on the 10th Amendment Center blog when we post it later today, that the ATF enforcement numbers, they do a report every year, show a significant increase. It's like 10% higher of enforcement categories all across the board from the ATF after the first year of Trump being in office. And it was like 90-some-odd% of these were on gun control efforts. So this is not good. And I've been warning people that this is a serious problem. And just last week, the Trump administration did a press conference, maybe it was impromptu, maybe it was planned, talking about, or maybe it was a different press conference. I saw the short video clip on this over the wires that Trump was talking about bump stocks. Now, this was a tool that was used in a shooting, and so therefore a lot of people think that it needs to be banned because the way to protect people, of course, is to eliminate all firearms, and that is the absolute opposite way, but we're not getting into that particular discussion. I just want to talk about the fact that Trump has been touting the fact that he is going to get rid of these devices called bump stocks. And before we get to that, I also want to say hi to EHP Training. I did say hi to Will Johnson and Bold Council. This is the kind of stuff that will be enacted while everyone is focused in 24/7 Trump hate. Yeah, well, they're going to get away with it as a big distraction, and certainly he is not good on this. So the ramping up of federal gun control enforcement, the 1934 National Firearms Act, the Gun Control Act of 68, which this is particularly going to apply to. Let's take a look and see what's going on here first. So for those who have not been following this, this comes from Fortune magazine. You can find it on Reuters and elsewhere. Trump says federal ban on bump stocks is in its final stages. President Donald Trump said Monday, this is last week Monday, his administration is nearing a ban on bump stocks, the gun accessory that can make a semi-automatic weapon function like a machine gun. While machine guns are illegal, this accessory is not. They shouldn't be illegal, certainly not on the federal level. And here's the quote. "We're knocking out bump stocks," Trump told reporters according to Reuters. "We're in the final 2 or 3 weeks, and I will be able to write out bump stocks. That sounds like a dictator to me, that he is personally going to write out a firearm accessory. Additionally, the National Rifle Association, which typically opposes gun control efforts, check this out, said when the bump stocks ban was proposed that it would not fight it. So the NRA isn't going to even oppose the NRA-backed president in acting on his own desire more gun control. And mind you, they're not working to pass a new law. He's not going to... If he went to Congress and said, write up a new law and I'm going to sign it, certainly we would oppose that because the federal government does not have any authority under the Second Amendment, under the Constitution, to ban firearms, firearm accessories, ammunition. Period. Zero. Nothing. Doesn't matter how dangerous it may be. They don't have the authority under the Constitution. So, but there would be something to be said that he at least tried to go through the legislative process. Here, instead, what he's trying to do is very similar to what Barack Obama did when Obama went for the M855 ammo ban. And we're probably going to talk about this a little bit more. I've got a little bit back and forth with Mike Meharry, our editorial director, communications director here at 10th Amendment Center, to basically kind of compare the process of what Obama did and the opposition, the fierce opposition that he had, and now what Trump is doing. To me, I think it's the similarities are going to be very interesting when we get into this. So here's what the NRA said. Devices designed to allow semi-automatic rifles to function like fully automatic rifles should be subject to additional regulations of course, federal, nationalized, centralized regulations. Now, here is the regulation that's proposed. Now, mind you, they put this up months ago. There's a comment period, and that comment period is closed. So it is happening. This is not stopping unless... I guess there's a possibility that there could be such a backlash, but it seems that the gun rights groups and many GOP activists, Republicans, and conservatives are so focused on going after the culture war of the left that they're forgetting that the culture war from the right is still a serious problem, especially when it comes to the right to keep and bear arms when no one is opposing them, not us. Shall not be infringed, Scouse Jack says, and that's right, but he's got an LOL with that because that's the way the government treats it. So let's read through this. This was closed as of June this summer. The Department of Justice proposes to amend the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive Regulations, and I got an interesting quote of the day that I think you guys are going to like on the BATFE. They're going to amend regulations already on the book to clarify that bump fire stocks, slide fire devices, and devices with certain similar characteristics, bump stock type devices, now if that isn't broad, are now machine guns. They're just redefining what's on the books to include a new product to call it as a machine gun as defined by the National Firearms Act of 1934, which shouldn't exist, and the Gun Control Act of 1968. Which shouldn't exist, because such devices allow a shooter of a semi-automatic firearm to initiate a continuous firing cycle with a single pull of a trigger. So what they're doing, and this to me, and I think we're going to do some coverage on this, is very similar to the approach that Obama took, and we'll probably cover it more soon, but if you followed what Obama tried to do in his waning years, he tried to get rid of M855 ammo. And he was basically doing it through this regulatory process, this rule-making, this fact-finding process where they would publish a new definition to include this type of ammo as banned under, I think it was under the GCA. It may have been under both like in this one. So he basically just wanted to change the rule, but there was significant opposition to it. And so that's a different story. Now, I don't see much opposition happening today. If anybody is being good on it, I would assume the GOA, Gun Owners of America, has generally been across the line very solid on these types of things. Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, JPFO, is usually really hardcore. I don't know. I haven't looked into it. Meharry is looking into it, and we're going to discuss this probably either with a report or a video in the near future. So here's the interesting part. The bump stock device, well, this is all interesting. The bump stock devices covered by this proposed rule were not in existence prior to the GCA's effective date. They didn't exist, supposedly. I haven't verified that. I don't necessarily trust anything that they're publishing here, so they could be using propaganda or lies. Maybe people were making bump stocks, maybe not. To me, it doesn't matter if they wrote a law that didn't cover something and then something new comes in. You don't just get to redefine things and all of a sudden say, well, now this is banned, this new technology, go through the legislative process, and then we'll oppose that too. So they weren't into existence and therefore would fall within the prohibition on machine guns if this notice of proposed rulemaking is implemented. Consequently, current possessors of these devices would be required to surrender them, destroy them, or otherwise render them permanently inoperable upon the effective date of the final rule. It is a fact that Donald Trump is a gun grabber. Period. And Jeff Sessions is as well, as long as they want to do this kind of unconstitutional garbage. EHP Training points out Trump knows little about the Constitution, gets bad advice all the time. I think that may be part of it. He's also a gun grabber. I think he has a history of being anti-Second Amendment. Taco Salad says NRA, not real activists. Will Johnson, before the Constitution came, what actually is and a correct understanding of it? I'm not sure what that means, but let's take a look at what T.J. Martinell said should be done in response. He says, of course, states should nullify Trump's unconstitutional bump stock ban. This is a really short blog where he basically points out that Republicans, it's a false claim that Republicans are supposedly good on the right to keep and bear arms in the Second Amendment because, once again, they're going to be more successful on gun control than probably Obama was. I think Obama probably would have done far more, but he has opposition. The Democrats certainly aren't going to oppose the Republicans on this. So if the Republicans are taking a bad position on it, then you've got a real bad problem because then you have consensus. And consensus in Washington, D.C. means your liberty is under direct attack. So TJ cites the original report at Reuters. We're knocking out bump stocks, Trump said, and you can see on the thumbnail image for this show that Trump said they're gone. They are gone. He is dead set on making this happen, and I believe he'll make it happen because generally when he wants to do stuff, he didn't do well on Obamacare either. So here's what TJ had to say. Regardless of how effective a bump stock ban might be in preventing mass shootings or reducing casualty count, and he says, not very, the feds have no authority delegated to them to enact such a rule. Under the Constitution, this power simply does not exist, and that's the important part. So what needs to be done? Well, if you can't rely on the NRA-backed GOP president to not slow down current gun control efforts because he's ramping up enforcement, and then to not stop new ones from coming, how are you supposed to stop the ones that are already on the books? Well, you have to look elsewhere. You have to look outside Washington, D.C. If you believe in the right to keep and bear arms, you cannot trust Washington, D.C. or Washington politicians or federal courts to limit federal power. And we know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to follow James Madison's advice. He's known as, I think it's a misnomer, but he is commonly called the father of the Constitution. And he gave us advice that I've covered on this show and we've covered in interviews and articles over and over and over in Federalist number 46. Let me quick pop over to this. There are 4 steps to stop federal programs. And when a federal program is unwarrantable, as Madison called it, that would be an unconstitutional act, or warrantable, even a constitutional act but bad policy, there are very powerful means at hand. Individuals and states can take action. And he said one of those 4 things is a refusal to cooperate with officers of the union. So don't participate. Don't help the federal government enforce federal laws. Period. This, in the legal world, is known as the Anti-Commandeering Doctrine. And from 1842 all the way till earlier this year in 2018 in a case called Murphy versus NCAA, the Supreme Court has done a rare thing. It has been consistent and it has been constitutionally sound on one thing over and over and over, and that is the Anti-Commandeering Doctrine. The Supreme Court repeatedly holds, and in fact, there was another case just, I think this past week, that the federal government says, or the Supreme Court says, the federal government, even if they do pass a law and they don't rule on the constitutionality of that law, or they say it is constitutional, the feds have to enforce it. They cannot commandeer like a pirate. They cannot require states or local communities, which are subdivisions, political subdivisions of those states, to use personnel or resources to help enforce or implement federal acts or regulatory programs. And this applies to federal gun control. In fact, one of the most famous cases on this was Prince versus U.S. This is Sheriff Mack and Sheriff J. Prince versus U.S. against the Brady Act. They said they weren't going to help enforce the Brady Act in some way. They took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court backed it up once again, saying that they don't have to use their resources on a local level to enforce the gun control law. Well, the same thing should be applied. Now, we're not going to rely on the courts, and if we were to rely on the courts, I think it would have a very good chance of actually going through. But the only way to have the controversy to say that this is going to be a court case, let the Trump administration sue, let's say, Arizona or Texas on this, or Montana, maybe Missouri, is for the state to actually say, we will not participate in this. We are taking a hands-off approach. If you want to deal with this, we're not going to. We're going to legalize bump stocks in our state. And then you have that conflict. And then the Supreme Court will probably, well, hopefully, come down on the side and say, okay, well, you can't force them to do this. And even if they didn't, it's a very powerful approach anyways. Madison said just merely refusing to cooperate will create basically roadblocks, impediments that the federal government would be hardly willing to encounter. This is his terms. And that was in a time when the federal government was extremely small in size, scope, and power. We can fast forward to a few years ago during the Obama administration, when there were great threats to the right to keep and bear arms, like they are today, but people thought they were going to be worse. And Judge Andrew Napolitano was commenting on some... Indirectly, he was talking about legislation that we have been pushing for years in states around the country, for states to say we're not going to participate. We have some passed. We're working with some people behind the scenes to get new legislation to deal with this bump stock ban going forward for 2019. And what did Judge Knapp say? He basically took the James Madison approach in an interview on Fox Business or Fox and Friends, March of 2014. He says, quote, "The federal government does not have the person, power, and resources to enforce all federal laws on its own. It needs the assistance of state and local police as well. They don't have that in Washington and Colorado because marijuana is lawful there. So it might be impractical, and too costly for the feds to enforce there." Now, we've done some research here, and we have found out that the ATF, that unconstitutional federal agency, which, of course, we all know should be a convenience store. Well, the ATF has about 5,100, maybe 5,200 employees for the entire country. A third of them are in administration. So they have, what is it, about 3,500 or so enforcement agents for the ATF. They can close about 8,000 cases per year under federal gun control laws. 8,000 cases. And that's probably with help from state and local law enforcement. Now, if they were doing it on their own, I mean, think about it. If they do a raid at a house or a safe house or whatever you may call it, an illegal manufacturer, it's not the ATF going in and doing it and coming up with all kinds of personnel. What they do is they call their partners in local law enforcement, the sheriff's department, local police department. They tell them they're investigating. They get information exchanged through fusion centers, through the NSA, through the DEA, and elsewhere, through the ATF, all the information that's exchanged. But then on the day of the physical raid, it's generally just one or two federal agents and 10 to 20 or 30 local agents doing the actual physical raid. So all of a sudden, you've got a serious imbalance of power when it comes to who's doing the things. So if states don't participate, as James Madison told us, and as Judge Knapp has reaffirmed, then the feds just don't have the resources. They can maybe lash out and attack people here and there on their own, but with just a few thousand enforcement agents, it would be a significant increase of funding, spending, and manpower size for them to do anything about this. I point out over and over, and I said this at a Mises Institute event in early 2017, if there were 11 million, 10 million, 30 million undocumented short-barreled shotguns around the country in violation of the National Firearms Act of 1934, the federal government wouldn't be able to do anything about it. The ATF wouldn't have the manpower or resources, and that particular regulation or so-called law would be null and void and of no effect in real practice, and that's extremely important. So kudos to Judge Knapp for pointing that out. Will Johnson, Matt Hughes says, Federalist 46 is the gift that keeps on giving. Absolutely. Will Johnson, something that is false, cannot stand to be repeated. It unfortunately does. We have to actually take a stand against him. And you're right, Will. This is how you nullify laws that are invalid. And according to Madison, even if they are valid, but you just think they're a bad choice, this is how you deal with it. This should be your first response. Taco Salad, the problem is far too many sheriffs are willing to go along with all the nonsense. Yes, and in fact, some of the greatest opposition that I would say the greatest opposition we've had to getting state nullification bills passed to protect the right to keep and bear arms have come from behind the scenes the NRA, in front of the scenes law enforcement lobbying organizations, and not the Bloomberg people, unfortunately. I mean, it would be a lot easier if it was them, in my mind. It is much more difficult when the NRA works to undermine you behind the scenes. They worked aggressively against us in Arizona, in Missouri, and in Florida. They don't want to see what they call 10th Amendment approaches to the right to keep and bear arms. They've been very clear about that with us. And yes, the sheriffs are bad on this. Alan Mosley, good to see you, my friend. If you guys have not watched my interview with him, it was episode 1 of season 2. It was really fun. So check out The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And now's a great time for everyone here to go over to 10th Amendment Center website and smash that donate button. Better yet, become a member and help our guys spread more liberty. Thank you. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members if you want to join in. Altops, TAC should offer lawyer insurance for Americans, which would supplement your efforts. I don't know if we are an insurance company. Man, we would have to be way more loaded in cash than you can even imagine that we are. We're extremely grassroots. Maybe somewhere down the lines. We want to keep doing what we do, which is educating people on what's going on, the proper role of government under the Constitution, and how to deal with it when they violate your rights. And that's where we're going with what Judge Knapp had to say, what T.J. Martinell had to say in his column or his blog yesterday. And then, of course, what James Madison pointed out in Federalist 46. And so we actually have legislation that we've put together. A version of it is already in law in Idaho. We are in the process of researching this law that passed, I think, in 2014. It was S. 1332, signed into law, that would ban the state from providing resources or using personnel to help enforce any new federal gun control act passed on or after January of that following year. So we believe, at least at first glance, we're going to look in it closer, that Idaho is already taking the first step to reject this bump stock ban from back when Obama was in office. Something similar was passed in Alaska. And then we're also working to see about legislation moving forward in possibly Arizona, maybe Kansas, Missouri, and elsewhere to reject this. I'm not sure if Utah is going to be on board, but generally what happens is we don't always know who's going to introduce the legislation. But when we make some noise about it in one state, one legislator does it in one state to an issue like this, then all of a sudden you see other legislators in other states saying, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going to get on board with this. And then suddenly it starts a bit of a domino effect. So the Second Amendment Preservation Act, the first step, we have a number of steps. The first step is to ban, because there is so much opposition from law enforcement. And when we try to nullify everything on the books, we get amazing opposition from law enforcement lobby groups. They don't want to stop working with their federal partners, is what they call them. And so we take a step one. We're not going to help out enforcing any new federal gun control. And that's what passed in Idaho a couple of years ago. And we'd like to see that going forward now because that establishes the baseline. It's very difficult to oppose that because so many people in the gun rights camp seem to be okay with what's already on the books. So we build a greater consensus there. We build some support. It's a little bit easier to get past, a little less difficult. It's still very hard to do this. And then we build on it from there. I'd like to see in Idaho and Alaska further steps. So we talk about this. Step 2 would be to take it another step and continue ramping it up. Now, if we can get it all done in one fell swoop, which is very unlikely from a strategic point because the states are so bad, because the law enforcement lobby groups are so bad, and because groups like the NRA are so okay with more federal gun control, like a bump stock ban from the Trump administration, it is logistically very difficult. But we're going to be that little train that could that's going to continue pushing on for the right to keep and bear arms, no matter who is trying to shove gun control laws down our throats. So EHP training, awesome that you guys are on board. Bama Kerry isn't satisfied with any gun laws. Gold standard with Alan Mosley. I'm depressed with my state of Tennessee showing little 10th Amendment fervor. So much for that Southern independent streak. Who do I have to harass here, Michael? Ooh, Brian Kelsey is one of your leading opponents there. He's the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Hopefully he's just going to get elected to the federal Senate soon so he can be out of our hair. But he's the guy that basically blocks. There's been all kinds of really good nullification legislation that's been pushed forward by people like Susan Lynn years ago. And I forget the lady that passed the first step for Tennessee on the right to keep and bear arms. But Kelsey's the guy that blocks anything significance. S. Mike says lots of liberal influence in the police department training, probably. Alltop said you could partner with like-minded insurance companies, which would fund your activism. I'm all into people funding our activism, so maybe that's something to look at. Taco Salad, I shot Mises Institute some shekels the other day. Next time I got some spare cash, I'll hit up TAC. We take that, or Satoshis, or Sound Money. Thank you all. I'm very grateful for that. But before I go today, and I think the message here is that there is more gun control already happening. There's more gun control on the way to even go further than what's on the books. The process that Trump is using is basically the same approach that Obama took with the M855 ammo ban that he wanted. But we don't have to rely on voting the bums out in Washington, D.C. to stop them. We can stop them on a state-by-state, community-by-community level. There are great people up in Oregon. Maybe I should actually try to do an interview with a guy named Rob Taylor up in Eastern Oregon. They're working to get gun rights sanctuary ordinances passed county by county, basically banning the enforcement of state or federal gun control laws on a county-by-county level, at least a vast majority of them. And that might be a way forward for people, especially in smaller towns, because it's so easy to get your community to support you when you're in a good place. Now, here in LA, that's a different story. I'm never going to see this pass, but I can help other people do this in other areas, and we can build some consensus around the country. Now, before we go today, I want to leave you guys with the quote of the day. I mentioned something about the ATF, and we posted a tweet over the weekend, and it's not necessarily I guess it's a quote. But it's my view, it's our view here at the 10th Amendment Center that the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and I guess it's ATFE now, they only have one thing that they're allowed to do under the Constitution, and that is disband. The only thing the ATF is authorized to do under the Constitution is disband. So I hope you learned something today. Again, there's bad news, but there's also good news here because it can be stopped. The ATF and the federal government does not have nearly the amount of manpower needed to enforce this type of thing, only through compliance. If you read libertarian writers, there's a guy named Hans Hermann Hoppe who pointed out in what I think is a very important speech for the Mises Institute back in the late 90s that is still very applicable today. He said, without local enforcement, by compliant local authorities, the will of the central government is not much more than hot air. He recognized the same thing even as an anarcho-capitalist. He recognized the same strategic advantage that local communities have, that James Madison, the constitutionalist, recognized, the same thing that I recognize, that you have to stop helping the federal government enforce these unconstitutional, immoral, unjust, illegal acts, and that's the way forward for liberty. So I want to thank you all for being here. I really appreciate everyone. Alan, EHP Training, Matt Hugh, Will Johnson, Taco Salad, All Tops. Oh man, I'm missing somebody. Bold Counsel, Scouse Jack. And if I missed you, thank you still for being here. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to smash that like. Alan Mosley was kind enough to point out, if you want to smash that donate button over on our website, 10thamendmentcenter.com, or become a member, that is very helpful. You can just go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. $2 a month helps us make a difference. There are a number of members that I see out here in the live chat. I'm very grateful for every one of you. Every single dollar, we stretch more than anybody. We did some calculations a few years ago, and we found that groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, where I have a featured page on myself there, they did a profile of me a few years ago as a dangerous leader of the radical right and extremist. I guess that's a badge of honor. They raise our annual budget, at least at the time, it's probably increased a little bit now, every 8 to 10 minutes. So the amount of money that we work on is incredibly small, but we get an amazing amount done. We don't have a building. We all work from home. We have volunteers. We've just done a lot with very little. We'll continue to do that. Our funds are growing slowly because I think people are recognizing that you can't rely on Washington, D.C. to limit itself. And we're very grateful for everyone who has been supporting us either financially or by smashing that like button, helping us spread the word. And that all means a lot. So I hope you've learned something today. I hope you're motivated to, I think the next step is going to be to contact your state senator and state legislator and ask them to introduce the Second Amendment Preservation Act for your state. I will post a link at the bottom of this video about 5 to 10 minutes after we're done. So feel free to take a look at that. Grab the legislation. It's a PDF download. Just email it to your state legislators. Ask them to introduce it. Don't even have to mention the bump stock ban if you don't want to. But if you think that will help, whatever you think is the best approach strategically, mention it, send an email, follow up by a phone call in 1 to 2 weeks, and then keep doing that until you get the legislation introduced. And then shoot us an email over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com to let us know how it's going or if you want some advice on what to do next. So I won't keep rambling. I've gone a little longer than I normally do today. This is a big issue to me. So I'm very grateful for you watching. I'm grateful for you smashing those likes. I'm grateful for our members. And I will see you again on Friday morning, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Have a great day. Thank you again for watching.